Our next session, the South Asian Symposium on Climate Change, will last 2 hours and 25 minutes. The first session will include the chairman of the session, Mr. Kanak Mani Dixit, founder and editor of the Himalayan Nepal. The keynote address will be delivered by Ms. Dechen Sering, Director, Climate Change Division and Director, Regional Office of Asia Pacific at UNEP. The first panel interaction will be Glacial Melt, a sustainable strategy for the water towers of South Asia. The facilitator will be Indrika Ratwatte, UN Resident Coordinator for Afghanistan, with Romina Alam, Coordinator to PM on Climate Change, Sonam Wangchuk, winner of the Raymond Magsaysay Award in 2018, and Aisha Khan, Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change of Pakistan. Over to Mr. Kanak Mani Dixit for the proceedings of the session.
And also, of course, from Pakistan. So I feel the message that the organizers want us to deliver from this podium is the interconnectivity of all South Asian environment, economies, public health, and the need to act. We have enough information by now, and there has also been enough emotional attempts to raise the emotional quotient of climate crisis. But we're not seeing action on the ground, on the hill terraces, or in the desert plains. So I believe that what our session would possibly do is try to shake us up a bit. And given that people are coming from all parts of South Asia, this is indeed an incredible opportunity. As a panelist said this morning, climate crisis is not a matter of the environment or even the economy or the politics or the geopolitics. It is a matter of poverty, she said. And I concur, because the depth and breadth of poverty in South Asia now surpasses poverty anywhere else in the globe. So if we are to feel for and empathize with the hundreds of millions of poor amongst us, then we are required even for that reason to do something about it. And I was at 2 p.m. today, I went into a particular site that gives you the evolving population by the second of the world and of the parts of the world. So this afternoon at 2 p.m., there were, we like to say South Asia has a quarter of the world's population, 25% nearly. And we like to say, hence, we have a duty to ourselves to do something about the climate crisis. But we are also talking about poverty quotient within that 25%. But let's just count how many South Asians there were, how many of us there were at 2 p.m. today. 1,985,226,402 individuals. So if we just keep saying we're a fourth of humanity, it's just a proportion. It is important to look at individual lives, and particularly the lives in poverty, which is why poverty is going to be heightened. The stress of individuals is going to be heightened with the climate crisis, already happening as we speak around South Asia. So when we speak of climate change, we had the code words. We had global warming, then we got climate change, then we started saying climate crisis, then we started saying climate emergency. But that's certainly not enough. There are new terms coming up even as we destroy our ecosystems more. We always used to say rising oceans and receding glaciers. That is no longer enough. Let me add to the terminology. We used to say GLOFs, glacial lake outburst floods. Even that is not now enough, because in the high Himalaya, from the Karakoram, Hindu Kush, all the way to Namcha Barua, in the easternmost tip of the Himalaya, you have permafrost melting. Permafrost melting the melting of permafrost is not yet a discussion even among academics, but the frozen frozen stones, boulders, dust, detritus is loosening up. And when you have extreme climate events and rainfall, you have what happened in Sikkim last year, what happened in the Melemchi River of Nepal 3 years ago. Incredible crisis for which we already have the indicators in front of us. And so beyond groundwater, and when we say groundwater loss, we tend to forget that the smog that goes up from Lahore, from the Pakistani Punjab and a part of Sindh, Indian Punjab, Haryana, they go up and the westerlies take everything eastward for 7 months of the year. And so it is not just a matter of aesthetics, friends. When that dust at 14,000, 15,000, 16,000, is almost like aerosol dust, settles on the snows, you have the albedo effect, which means that the snow melts much quicker because of the darkness on the surface. It does not reflect back the sun. But not to talk science, but to talk sociology, what that does is it reduces groundwater. And when groundwater is reduced across the swathe of the Himalaya, the water in the Ganges and the Brahmaputra and of course the Indus depletes drastically. So the link between burning crop residue in the Punjab, receding glaciers, is also leading to groundwater loss. So these are the kind of connections I believe the organizers have wanted us to draw, and there are specialists in the diverse arena here before you today. Before that, of course, we will have Dechen, who is with the United Nations Environmental Program, herself coming from Bhutan, will have much more to share also from her very important position that she holds for the region, and soon to be the UNEP head, I gather, for Asia, more or less, yes. I'll end with two quick points. The term Anthropocene is now almost passé. Nevertheless, it has not infiltrated our local tongues. We do not say Anthropocene and don't have a word for it in Urdu or Punjabi or Hindi or Nepali or Sinhala or Bangla or Dihevi. I suggest that if you don't have a term, how can you actually describe? Because in the end, we need to go to the grassroots to energize the politics with alerting an alert of the crisis we're in. So what we have decided in Nepal is to popularize the term Anthropocene rather than go look for a term with a Sanskrit root. Likewise, there's no reason to go for a Persian root for Anthropocene speaking in Urdu, for example. So in Nepal, we're popularizing Anthropocene, just to get the message across. The brown cloud, as we call it, black carbon, whatever, when it rises from industrial activity, from emissions, from agricultural residue burning. Last year, friends, last December, we tend to think of this cloud as only going as far as Bangladesh from here, from the Punjab plain. It actually, last year, twirled over the Bay of Bengal, went down to Sri Lanka, and as far as Maldives. So let no one say that for now that the Indo-Gangetic smog impacts only the Indo-Gangetic Valley. It is all over. And sadly, our governments are turned away from each other. At the very point where we need to be talking to seek desperate measures, our governments are actually at loggerheads, particularly two largest governments of our South Asian space. And so you see it in the condition of SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, practically moribund. The summit to have been held in Islamabad in November of 2016, it has been hanging fire. The government of Nepal has been forced to hold on to the chairmanship of SARC. We need to find a way through sessions such as this to send the word, please talk, please keep issues and problems on the shelf, because the crisis, as many people have said before me, is existential. So how is it that the media talks about the smog all the time in Lahore, in Punjab, in India, in Delhi, in Haryana? How come nobody does anything about it? What Yogendra Yadav, a very prominent social scientist as well as politician of India, of New Delhi, wrote an article 3 weeks ago, where he said that while everybody is agreed about the crisis with the AQI in Delhi and in the rest of the Haryana, Punjab plains, why is nothing happening? Because the politicians do not raise it. There is a silence of convenience among, right now there is a elections coming up, as you know, and the political parties who are fighting each other are at loggerheads. They don't talk about AQI. So there's something going on, and that something is wrong in our politics. Within our politics, there's a problem, and with our interpolitics, our geopolitics, there's a problem. So I think I end there with my chairman's remark, which became a little longer than I had planned. I apologize. May I now introduce Dechen, who is, of course, as you know, the Dechen Chering is Director, Climate Change Division and Director, Regional Office of Asia and Pacific, UNEP. UNEP, of course, as the organization which should be the bellwether for all of us. Please.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Kanak. Colleagues, as of 1st February, I'm the Regional Director for Asia Pacific and no longer Climate Director. You've also heard about loss of nature, land degradation, pollution, and the impact on water. If you start to look at the three crises, what we're calling the triple planetary crises, and it relates to its impact on water, whether it's disasters, floods, droughts, desertifications. We're looking at wildfire, and it's all linked to water. My presentation today will really focus on three aspects. I'll talk about glacial lakes, I'll talk about decarbonization, and I'll talk about air pollution. And I think it's really good that we frame it from a South Asia perspective. The Himalayas, as Kanak's talked about the third pole, talks about home to vast glaciers that feed major river systems, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra. And yet we know that the rising temperatures, the glacial melt, the erratic weather patterns threatens livelihoods. This year, 2025, is International Year of Glaciers, and it's really an opportunity for us to highlight the adverse impacts of climate change. You've already heard how the impacts of glacial melt, but what you've seen is that the glacial melt has increased from 1998 to 2007, and it will further increase till 2050. And the far-reaching impacts of agricultural impact, you're looking at food security, livelihoods of millions depend on farming, the economic strain, again, the damage to infrastructure. We've seen when we've had, basically monsoon floods on steroids, devastating impacts. You've looked at the health impacts, waterborne diseases, compromising water and sanitation, public health challenges, and of course, energy security. A lot of the region depends upon hydropower. But what we're not seeing, and there are many interventions, there's the early warning for all, there's the systematic observation financing facility, and a lot of this is looking at data, sharing of data, but I think in South Asia we can do better. For us, we can learn from each other in terms of the data that we share, in terms of the hydrological, meteorological information, climate resilient policy, investing in water management, learning from floods, glacial lake outburst floods, how do we restore ecosystems, And this is probably the sub-region where there is the lowest level of exchange of information, and here there is an opportunity to do so. But while we look at, when we look at the adaptation to the adverse impacts of climate change, the flip side is we need to reduce carbon emissions to slow glacial retreat. And so while we look at building adaptive capacity, building resilience, everyone talks about the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we had the 29th Conference of Parties. And really, what are they? I mean, the focus is the focus on mitigation, and if you look at the nationally determined contributions, it's basically for every country to look at an investment plan. In order to address climate mitigation, this is a country's investment plan. These are the greenhouse gas sources and sinks. These are the sectors that will be impacted. And on the flip side, countries produce national adaptation plans. And these are plans that are supposed to really look at how does a country formulate plans to reduce vulnerability? How do you integrate climate into planning budgetary systems? How do you look at agricultural resilience, food security? But often what has happened is that how we work on climate change, and we have tremendous negotiators. We have, we have, the coordinator minister from Pakistan. We have their voices, which are really important, because it's going to need a signal to the financial system, to the architecture, on where resources are, the signal for trade and environment. And the third part about this process is what we call the transparency regime. And it's a regime where we measure, report, verify the information and the resources for countries to look at building the information base that helps them understand the impacts, both mitigation and adaptation. So many countries in our region have prepared national adaptation plans. Pakistan is preparing one, Nepal has, Mongolia has, Maldives have. And all these plans, they've identified agriculture, food security, health and well-being, infrastructure, energy systems, early warning, disaster reduction as the top sectors. And there's been a lot of efforts to include water, freshwater ecosystems. But where we find, and all these processes, I mean, if I've started to look at countries that have been successful, it's been successful when you've had a presidential council or a prime minister's council that looks at climate. Because climate, unlike many other issues, it affects energy, it affects infrastructure, it affects transport, it affects water, it affects health, it affects food systems, it affects agriculture. So you can't depend on your traditional sectoral ministers. It affects trade and environment. It has to come together. And I'm very excited that under the leadership of our UN resident coordinator, Mohammed, is actually going to do, an analytic work on the financial flows that come in. When we looked at the 100 billion that went to climate finance, and now you're looking at a new target, many countries wanted to know where that money was coming. And we found that much of it that came in was not understood by the country, the governments, and a lot of it was going through private sector. And I think the more information that is out there, that would be important to understand where the interventions are happening. In India, if you look, you had the National Agricultural Bank of Rural Development, NABARD, 50 billion, and they realized all the interventions for agricultural interventions, and they're now accredited to the Green Climate Fund. So much of the work that is happening, I think, are there isn't enough information, and I think there's an opportunity to put this information to see where there are transitions happening. If you look at emissions, decarbonization, 80% of the emissions are from the G20 countries. So that's already there. So already the focus is, which countries we have to focus on. In this region, the emissions, 55% of Asia-Pacific accounts for all the global emissions, comes from urbanization, industrialization, deforestation, fossil fuel. And if we look at the energy increase, our region, the energy increase grew 151% between 2000 to 2023. So every year countries, the next round of nationally determined contributions they expected to be ready by February 2025, and many countries will take longer. And what the NDCs give us an understanding and accounting of where we are in the emission gap. And this is the emission gap to stay within 1.5 degrees. Right now, in order to stay within a 1.5-degree world, a very, very small gap. I mean, is we have to cut emissions 42% by 2030, 57% by 2035. And so the emissions from our region, again, you've heard this morning, energy, industry, transport, waste, forestry, agriculture, marine ecosystems. And South Asia continues to have an appetite for coal. While we see coal and the use of coal in energy production declining, it still represented 60% of energy generation in South Asia in 2021. And so when we look at how do we hasten this transition, many countries in Southeast Asia, in Africa, have signed up to the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And the Just Energy Transition Partnership is getting financing to hasten the investment in renewables. So we start to look at, so our region, the instruments they use are subsidies, tax, incentives, tariffs, and there are positive stories. I mean, India now has a target, a renewable energy capacity target of 450 gigawatts by 2030, a national hydrogen mission. And we've started to look at, when South Korea had their Green New Deal, they invested 61 billion renewable energy, green grids, smart grids, energy efficiency. The Just Energy Transition Partnership in our region, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines. And Sri Lanka's aim to achieve 70% renewable energy generation by 2030, phasing out coal by 2042, and a very ambitious EV policy. Bhutan's committed to carbon neutrality, and here again, it's linked to maintaining forest cover at 60%. And so while we know that where countries have been successful are if there is the policy and then the instruments that follow, and there can be a lot of cross-country learning in South Asia. At the UN, we set up what we call an issue-based coalition, and it's about 17 UN agencies at the regional level. And our focus is to look at the nationally determined contributions. These are investment plans countries do, and try to learn from each other. We've also looked at sharing practices in low energy, and we've looked at showcasing emission gaps. Every year, the issue-based coalition produces sort of a nationally determined contribution from the Asia-Pacific region. And this information, we are hoping countries will come together and then look at different ways that they can work together. The South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, based in Sri Lanka, and they have on the governing council all the ministers of South Asia. They've had the Mali Declaration to combat transboundary movement of air pollution, and they've produced science policy assessments. ICIMOD has done a lot of work on glacial lake outburst floods, and they have their regional science policy frameworks, adaptation at altitude. They're working on air pollution, they're working on glacial melt, and they've also been starting to look at discussing, would there be space for something like a Hindu Kush Council? If the glaciers and the mountains are so important for the region, we have the Arctic Council. Is there a space where South Asia can sit together and discuss some of these issues? Does it matter what the mountainous countries do and its impact on the low-lying countries? And SCAP hosted in last December, a workshop on air pollution and looking at policies and technical cooperation. Kanak's already talked quite a bit about air pollution. And he's talked about the importance of limiting the melting of the water towers and the interlinkages between air quality and climate change. And when we talked about air pollution, we really look at black carbon, short-lived climate pollutants, and they pose a dual threat. It harms health, glacial melt. And so and Kanak's already talked about if there's additional warming due to black carbon and dust deposited on glaciers and snowfields in the Hindu Kush Karakoram Himalayas, and it leads to accelerated melting. So at the moment, I mean, when we worry about, melting glaciers, we worry about not having enough snow, we worry about our rivers not being replenished, we don't want another force that accelerates melting of glaciers. And so, in addition to carbon dioxide, we have to start to look at short-lived climate pollutants. We have to look at gases like methane and nitrous oxide. And if you look at methane, addressing methane emissions would be 0.3% centigrade of global warming by 2045. And you're talking about losing less 25 million tons of crop losses and less 260,000 premature deaths. The International Methane Emission Observatory has what you call a methane alert response system, and they have these satellites on the ground, and they provide actionable data. And last year, UNEP issued 1,200 notifications of major methane leaks, and 2 of those leaks led to the equivalent, shutting off the leaks led to the equivalent of 1 million cars the emissions from 1 million cars produced annually being turned off. So while you're looking at other ways to reduce emissions, there are technological in terms of shutting off the methane leaks. And again, nitrous oxide, again, premature deaths. And so here it's really important that we start to look at their impact. The burden of air pollution on South Asia. We were looking at WHO interim target of 35 micrograms is considered the least stringent, and you start to see the particulate matter across the region. You've seen numbers. So we're looking at acting on air quality, benefits from climate, air quality point of view. Under the SCAP, there's a regional action program on air pollution, a resolution. And what this means is the region would come together. We would monitor air pollution. We would do source apportionment, so we would know which sectors had the major emissions. And then we would look at mitigation measures. UNEP is also looking at a regional instrument for air pollution. So I think my message is whether we look at air pollution, we look at glacial lake outburst floods, we look at decarbonization. This is tremendous opportunity for this sub-region. Thank you, Kanak.
Thank you, Dejan, and we wish you all the best for the sake of all of Asia as you take up your position as Director Regional Office for Asia Pacific at UNEP. And indeed, you mentioned the Arctic Council and the suggestion that there should be a Himalaya Hindu Kush Council. If there is a resolution that we could have passed in this session, that is the resolution that I would propose passing. We now go into the first panel discussion. We have, as the panelist participants, we have Romina Alam, who's a member of the National Assembly, also deeply involved in negotiations at COP and elsewhere, coordinated with the Prime Minister on climate change. Then we have Sonam Wangchuk, who's introduced in the list here as the Raman Magsaysay Award winner of 2018. That is true, but he is so much more than that. He's an educator and a true activist in the sense that over the last couple of years, in fact, he's been at the interface between politics and environment in a very real activistic sense, to the extent of being also putting into a lot of difficulties on the part of the state. We have Aisha Khan, who's with the Civil Society Coalition of Climate Change, and as she said before, we came into the session in the green room. She would really like to talk about not so much the community issues as interstate or regional issues, if I'm right, Aisha. And let me now introduce the participant as well as facilitator, Indrika Ratwatte from Colombo. He has had a long experience through the UN on the arena of refugee affairs, including Afghan refugees in Pakistan, which means that if we are talking about poverty and how climate change impacts those in poverty more than others, then the bottommost slice, if one might say so, impacted are the refugees. And so that obviously means that Indrika has the sensitivity required to discuss climate change. Presently, you are the UN Resident Coordinator, Afghanistan. I ask you to manage the panel and participate yourself.
Thank you very much. I think the stage setting has been excellent with you and Gretchen framing the thing as glacial melt as a cross-cutting, transboundary challenge for all of us. And the data is clear. Whether it's the Hindu Kush, Himalayas, the Karakoram regions, this is holding the largest reserves of fresh water outside the polar regions. And that's why it's called the water towers of South Asia. And here we're talking, as you've said already, 1.5 billion people across South Asia, and the impact it has, whether it's on agriculture, hydropower, drinking water supplies. But impacts of climate change have really turbocharged glacial melt, as you have seen. Temperatures have accelerated, and today we are looking at a retreating average of 0.3 meters per year. And in the last 4 decades, in the last 40 years, we have seen approximately 15% of glacier ice that has been lost. This is an incredible amount of glacial degradation. And this rapid glacial melting has also had one immediate knock-on effect, which we have seen, is 3,000 glacial lakes, of which 33 are considered to have been classified as highly hazardous. So the water melting, collecting, lakes forming, and then the impact that goes through that, posing serious threats of, as was already alluded to, glacial lake outbursts and floods, or as we like acronyms, GLOFs, one more fantastic acronym to our nomenclature. Yeah. The UN also loves acronyms, as you know, so we are adding to this. But on a more serious note, it goes beyond the immediate impacts of the devastation, impacting infrastructure, as we talked about, disrupting livelihoods in vulnerable countries, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan in the basin, but it also contributes to long-term water scarcity, erratic river flows, prolonged drought, and then leading to desertification as well. So glacial melt as a phenomenon has a knock-on impact, as we've talked about, which are far more far-reaching in this way. What does it mean? It means, as has been alluded to by many other speakers this morning and today, and you'll hear from our illustrious panelists, the importance really for urgent collaboration, technological innovation, and sustainable strategies at a regional level as well to mitigate the impacts of glacial melt and to really ensure the water security resources for future generations. Just 2 days ago, I was in Helmand, in a remote area of Afghanistan, sitting with some farmers. And when I asked them, what is the most important thing for you? They said, water. And I said, what's the second most important thing and the third most important thing? And they said, water and water. So I think it says it all in terms of how it impacts just in a country like Afghanistan alone, where 70% is agrarian population relying on water and the lack thereof. And this is a phenomenon we are seeing in the South Asian region. So in the interest of time, let me not, without any further ado, our illustrious panelists have been already introduced. So let me ask them to just give us their shared insights based on their experience and their encounters with people, institutions, policies, and give us some insights. So let me start with Romina, then to Sonam and Aisha Khan. So, Romina.
Thank you very much. For me, it's a great honor to be with such a learned panel. And of course, the people who are sitting at the other side, all the participants who have been here. I first of all really want to congratulate and want to pay a great thanks and acknowledgement to all, of course, for me, it's great to see such a learned media persons over here, and of course to the Dawn, because I believe this is the greatest need of the time, that the media's responsibility. And I really want to say that hats off to you, that you have taken a lead. And not only that, I just wanted to request that it's a great need of the time that we should come up with the International Climate Caucus on media, of the media, because I think it's all very much important when we talk about all these elements, because without that, things won't get resolved, because there are so many things which are being hidden, there are so many things which are being unfolded, there are so many things which are being said, but they have not been known to the people. But now getting back to the point and the subject which you have said, when we talk about the glaciers, when we talk about Pakistan, when we talk about our region, I always believe, and what I've learned from all the learned people and all from the experiences and from the researchers, the greatest need is to come up with global, first, of course, the global solutions, but moreover, to the regional solutions. When we talk about the Pakistan, of course, I would really like to share where that one of, about glaciers in Pakistan, one of the greatest achievement in the recent glacier inventory conducted in Pakistan, which has revealed that we have a total of 13,032 glaciers across the country. So it's a huge number. So Pakistan hosts over 13,032 glaciers, the largest number outside the polar region. This is a significant finding, of course, made possible through the collaboration I want to share with you of the experts from EV K2CNR, along with the universities and the government institutions of Gilgit-Baltistan. So, of course, when we talk about rapid melting due to the rising temperature poses risk on the glacial lake outburst floods, affecting millions of people. And then, of course, when we talk about the Indus River, which relies heavily on glacial melt, it is at a risk, of course, threatening water security. But when we talk about the regional collaboration and, the solutions, I really wanted to share over here, because I'm glad that it's almost, we all are from, if we talk about Nepal, Sri Lanka, all like countries, a region, like when we talk about the importance of the SARC, it is moreover important, like we have seen from COP1 to COP29. Then, of course, we have seen COP16, which has been recently done in, at the Riyadh, that was about the land desertification and biodiversity and so much more, which is going to be conducted next in Bhutan. So, the most important and the missing component is the collaboration. The developing countries and the regions need to sit together to come up with the solutions, because until and unless we are not going to do that, there are lots of challenges which are going when you went to a village and over there you asked the need. So they said water, water, and water. I believe this is moreover now climate challenge is no more just a climate challenge. It's a human rights issue. It's a need of a time. It is need of, it's like, and as per the constitution, of course, 25A of Pakistan, and of course in all other countries, we all know that everyone have the right to live. So climate change is also something which is very much needed. If we talk about the glaciers specifically, the most nearby the communities, how they're suffering, how they're getting vulnerable, and in that we are trying moreover to engage the local communities. Yes, of course, in we do have different projects on which we have worked with the project like GLOF2 as well, and in that also Recharge Pakistan as well, which we are going to talk in next few minutes. But I think the most important for me, as very rightly said, that we should, at least from this panel, we should come up with some resolution where that not only in the state, I would really like to share that at the COP, we tried our level best to sit along with the other countries. We welcomed, because this is something now, whatever was happened or is happening in Pakistan or in Bhutan or in another country, it is not going to stay there. It is going to be moved on and on. Today is Pakistan, tomorrow it can be someone else. So as soon as possible, because I believe this is more over the war footage situation. So I think in that, I just wanted to say that more important is to come up with the regional solutions. We need to sit together to come up with a mechanism, to not only the mechanism, the policy, and to generate the risk pool. And that risk pool doesn't mean the money also. That means, moreover, the capacity, how we can learn from each other's best practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romina. Now let me turn to Sonam and hear from him on innovations in sustainable glacier management and the importance of bringing in the blending of traditional knowledge with science. Over to you, Sonam.
Thank you very much. Salam alaikum and namaskar, and Jule as we greet in very, very cold place called Ladakh. For you, it might be interesting to know that the region of Ladakh is where Indus River begins, on which most of Pakistan depends. And what happens there will have an effect here, and what's happening there is not very good. Now, about sustainable ways of managing the water towers of Asia. I think water towers was very aptly termed. Water towers, the strength is in its height. So coming to specifics, I would say the best way to deal with water is to stop it at the height that it is. Height is a great resource, more than oil, I would say. Mountains are what gives height to water, whether in frozen forms or in permafrost or in flowing water. Now, stop it where it is should be our strategy. And stopping it there and then making it useful downstream can be done in two ways. One would be freeze and refreeze. Freeze it when it flows in cold mountains so that it can be used in spring and summer when farmers need it. In other words, artificial glaciers. That's what we do in Ladakh. Artificial glaciers, man-made, during winters when nobody needs water for agriculture, to keep it till spring and summer when everybody needs. So freeze every drop where possible, and then it melts and goes down. This freezing can be of streams, it can be higher up of glacial lakes, which are becoming like a ticking time bomb. You can refreeze the glacial lakes using various technologies, and we are working on them. You can siphon them out and refreeze them. By siphoning, you reduce the risk of the lake, and by refreezing, you make it into an asset that can serve people downstream. So refreezing glacial lakes to refreezing streams, freeze, freeze, freeze should be the strategy to keep it at the height that it is. Now, these artificial glaciers also will not go for very long because there's less and less snow, less and less freezing in coming decades, and therefore we'll have to learn to live with rain and more rain. So therefore the strategy should be to learn to soak it, to absorb it in the mountains, soak, soak, soak. And that can be done in many ways by vegetating the high valleys. We're trying to do that so that there are indigenous trees and shrubs and bushes that grow that holds the water. You can have swales, you can have check dams, and in flood-prone streams, you can have ice dams that are made in winter but disappear in summer when floods come, so no obstruction or destruction. So therefore, soak, recharge. You can have recharge wells and various other mechanisms to recharge the whole mountain so that water comes slowly. Because when water comes fast, as it will, as rains increase, it will cause destruction, floods. When it is soaked or frozen, it comes very gently, being very useful to people. Now, thirdly, strategy should be educate, 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 because one needs to learn how to do these things. So education of communities, education of youth and children to deal with the new changes in the mountains. And for that, in Ladakh, we are starting a whole university called Himalayan Institute of Alternatives Ladakh, or HIAL, to basically learn and teach to deal with climate change. And I'm happy that Gitanjali is here, who heads that university. People around the mountains will have to relearn, re-educate themselves to deal with that. Now, these things can be done in the mountains. At these institutes, we also do solar heated buildings that can be plus 20 inside when it is minus 20 outside. All these we need to learn, but we cannot stop glacial melting with these mechanisms that I just said. Great for local strategies, but not enough to save our glaciers. So the answer for that is not so much in the mountains, high Himalayas. It's more in big cities like Islamabad, Karachi, Mumbai, Beijing, New York, London, because that's where climate change is starting. We cannot also just blame them far away, but cities that are closer to the Himalayas, Hindu Kush, are even more to blame, whether it is in Kashmir or Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar. These cities not only add to the carbon dioxide, but they also release black carbon, which goes with the wind and sits on our glaciers and thereby melts it even faster because black absorbs sun's energy. So our message to the world always has been, please live simply in the big cities so that we in the mountains simply live. And this message needs to reach the whole world, and I'm so happy that media and leadership have a great role to play, and in Pakistan I see Dawn Media is taking that responsibility as a champion of environment. I wish all countries, and in my country, a media house really takes this responsibility like here. Similarly, leadership has to take charge, world leaders. While many world leaders are now denying climate change even, I'm happy that Prime Minister Modi has not only taken many initiatives, but also launched a special mission called Mission Life, Lifestyle for the Environment, to urge the people to live simpler life. This kind of initiative we expect from leadership, from media, from celebrities all, so that we later, have a safer place to live in the mountains. Finally, I want to congratulate and thank UN for declaring 2025 as the UN Year of Glacial Preservation. That's an amazing initiative like this. So with such initiatives, I have some hope that we still will live, survive, and perhaps thrive in the mountains. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonam, for that impassioned, practical, realistic, hands-on, innovative message to all of us. Now, let me turn on to Aisha Khan, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. I'm sure everyone's very tired, but I think we just need 5 or 10 minutes of your time and attention. I'll pick up where Sonam left to say that this is the year of glacier preservation, the year 2025. So I begin by saying that mountains are marvel of nature. Mountains are also sacred places. But I think we also need to remember that mountains are home to mountain communities. We have tourists who flock these places. They go there for adventure sports. They go there for recreation, perhaps sometimes for spiritual healing as well. But they leave the place degraded. They don't understand that mountain communities rely on these ecosystems for the ecological goods and services to survive. So this is very, very important that we learn to understand that when we enter a sacred domain, and mountains are sacred domains to me. I've been working with mountain communities for the last 2 decades, and I've visited Nepal and other countries with mountains, and there is something about mountain communities that goes beyond this. For us in South Asia, it's very, very important to remember that these mountains are a source of water for us. When we talk about the Himalaya, Karakoram, and the Hindu Kush, they directly supply water to 240 million people and indirectly to about 1.8 billion people who rely on these water supplies. So if we do not take an integrated approach to their management, we will not be able to retain the flows that we are getting. So I want to highlight just in the short time that I have 2 things that are very important to me. One is the centrality of mountain communities and communities everywhere, because all the approaches that we take or make have to be community-centric. And the other one is the imperative of taking a regional approach. I say this because we live in a geography that extends from the cryosphere to the coast. Whether we look at it from the regional lens or we look at it from a country lens, what happens in the mountains does not stay in the mountains. It cascades and it has an impact on all the communities till it reaches the coast, which means that communities and their resilience is very important. Communities who live in rural areas really do not understand what's happening to them or why these things are happening to them. So that's where the civil society role comes in. They have to step in. They have to serve as a bridge between science and policy. They have to train these communities. They have to educate these communities. They have to pass on the messages. For example, the whole day today, we've received a lot of knowledge, information that was disseminated in this room to an already perhaps informed audience, but these messages are taken by civil society actors to the communities and explained in simplified language what it means to their lives and livelihoods. On the regional front, I just want to say that we are standing at the crossroads of history right now, where we have to negotiate both with nature and with the countries that surround us in the region, especially with the upper riparian. Now, anyone who's been involved in negotiations knows that there are 2 approaches to negotiation. One is the distributive approach, which means that there's always a winner and a loser, and the winner tries to get the lion's share, the maximum, without caring what happens to the other half or the other 3/4 of the community, because the idea is to cut a deal that is beneficial for you. This is unjust and therefore unsustainable. The other approach to negotiation is an integrative approach where there are no losers and everyone is a winner, because here we're not looking to get the maximum pieces of that pie. We're trying to see how we can make pies so that everyone gets a share, and that is the just system, and that is what lasts long time. So I think at the country level, within communities, we need to create more awareness. We also need to find a way how to co-create policies, because from what I see, the policies that are made do not really reflect the hopes, aspirations, and the priorities of the community. So we have to go to the communities and we have to co-create those policies that are more reflective. And at the regional level, we have to develop a very integrative negotiating approach in which I think climate diplomacy will be extremely important. The 2 key words for me that are always very important in everything that you do in life, but especially in climate action, are balance and harmony. We have to strike that balance so that we live in harmony with other countries in the region and we live in harmony with climate and with nature. So if we are looking to move towards social, ecological, and democratic equity, civil society plays an important role, because at the end of the day, it is civil society that elects the leadership who take the policy decisions that decide the future of where things will go, how things will happen. So with that, I will give it back to you, Indrika, in the hope that, like the other panelists have said, that this is the first step in the right direction and it will lead to more things that will perhaps bring us together regionally to work together and take collective ownership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for that last appeal as well, for that connectivity, which is quintessential. Let me usurp the remaining time by giving you each a question to answer. Time pressure. But let me start with Romina. Given your leadership in Pakistan's climate policy, can you elaborate succinctly the government strategies to mitigate glacial melt impacts, and how does the GLOF2 project contribute to this effort? Over to you.
Thank you very much. As you said, that I'll try to be very short, relevant, and focused. Well, when it comes to the importance and, of course, the policy, of course, that is something where the Ministry of the Climate Change and Environmental Coordination, they're taking, of course, putting an immense value along with by engaging all the experts and civil society and by keeping everything into the monitoring and all that. So promoting that, how we can promote the sustainability practices in ecotourism as well, and protected the area management, which is very much important, as Aisha has mentioned. Then Pakistan, I really wanted to share, as we just heard from my dear panelists, Pakistan has launched a glacier protection initiatives under the National Climate Change Policy. Then the GLOF2 project funded by GCF and UNDP aims at community-based early warning system in northern areas, because in that, of course, need to enhance more the trans-boundary water diplomacy and between South Asian nations for joint monitoring and response. And then, of course, the very important, I believe, is a flagship program as well that is called Recharge Pakistan Initiative. In that program, aimed at using of the nature-based solutions to restore wetlands and enhance flood resilience along with the Indus. So in this way, the ministry is doing the coordination, actively working towards protecting wetlands and ecosystem. That is very much important. And of course, in that, as we are focusing moreover to the climate diplomacy towards, so of course, and I believe the policies after day by day, of course, there is so much room or places there for coming up for the better towards the betterment. I tried to be short.
Romina, that was excellent. And now over to you, Sonam. Your iStupa project has received global recognition. And how can such community-driven solutions be scaled up across South Asia to address water shortages resulting from glacial melt?
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. For technologies and ways of dealing with such issues, which are all new, there must be, first of all, laboratories where things are tested, experimented, like we are doing at Himalayan Institute. And then it has to be disseminated to people so that it can be scaled up throughout the Hindu Kush Himalayas. And one way we are seeing in Ladakh at Hayal, the Himalayan Institute, is to get people from all of these places for courses, modules that they can participate, learn the techniques, and go back to their places and become partners in implementing in their own context. Yeah? That way, because technologies are not easy for every village community to invent. So there could be regional laboratories. We hope Himalayan Institute of Ladakh can become Himalayan Institute of Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and various countries where you prepare the young and the old for understanding their climate, their context, and coming up with solutions. So education would be an important way, or training and empowering, enabling, capacity building. Then engaging the community should be a part of it. Like in Ladakh, we always try to take the community along to finally implement it. Then in that case, you don't need so much funding because the community does it as an emergency. But still, there will be need, even if reduced, resources to support implementation of such techniques, whether it is check dams or ice stupas or cloth refreezing, will need resources. And there's no reason why these places should be punished to have their own resources, or even the countries. I mean, globally this is being done, so the global community should be there to take part. I know there are various ways of financing climate change adaptation and mitigation, but maybe there is need for even better and bigger, and maybe people could include water in carbon credit. You could maybe club water credit and carbon credit so that whenever a community restores water, yeah, corporates get that credit for restoring water also and not just carbon, because it's two sides of the same coin. On a bigger scale, I think, our foundations of our economics needs to change globally to finance such action of emergencies. Like in the past, our currencies were based on gold, which made some sense. It's against the gold that you draw your currency. Now it is not. And now it's very funny digital mining for bitcoins that don't do anything to solve the problem. Instead, consume even more energy, guzzle more energy, cause more of these. Everybody comes up with their own coin. I think there should be actually, the new coin should be carbon or oxygen coin, because that's your lifeline, more important than gold. If that is done, then nations who conserve their forests, enlarge their forests or conserve water, will immediately get the wealth. They can draw rupees against that, the trees or the water conserved, and they'll be wealthier. It's like mining oil, but oil is physical. You have it, so you see it. This could be something the global, and UN can take an initiative in that, to consider oxygen and water as the gold of tomorrow and link it to our currency so that nations that do the most are naturally wealthy, just like having oil. Yeah, things like that. But anyway, lots of many ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sonam. I think that's a very innovative idea as well. Let me quickly turn to Aisha and say, how can civil society organizations foster greater community engagement and regional collaboration to combat glacial melt and its impact?
Thank you very much again for that question. I think I'll go to the regional part first, because I think we have to first understand that every country in this region is an upper or lower riparian to another state, and we cannot change our geography. So we have to learn to work with each other. The water flows from Bhutan downwards, and we rely on these waters all the way down to Afghanistan. So if we don't promote hydro-solidarity and we don't learn how to do more with less water, which will be the inevitable reality in our future, we will not be able to collaborate. Now, why civil society role becomes more important at this time in fostering collaboration and enhancing communication is because South Asia, despite being one large landmass, is perhaps the most least integrated region in the world. We share land, water, air, but politically, we have differences which keep us from coming together and pooling our energies and strengths together to promote the resilience of the region as a whole. So civil society can be that bridge for now to improve communication, enhance coordination between civil society actors, showcase certain projects and pilots that enhance the value of collaborative approach, and take that agenda forward. So I think that overall, I keep emphasizing on this point that we have to put other differences on one side for right now, because right now, what we are fighting for is battle for our survival. We have to survive and exist first before we turn to other issues. And climate action and climate change are both critical threats that are existential in nature. So we have to decide, what do we want to bequeath to the next generation, chaos or some level of stability? So working together on climate change really requires civil society action, and it requires political will, it requires social harmony, and it requires collaboration between academia, researchers, and scientists within the region, all of whom have pockets of excellence and expertise and examples of best practices which they can learn and share with each other to promote South Asia. But for that, we also need to start looking at this region as one South Asia so that we work for all of humanity and not just concentrate on our individual countries.
Thank you very much, Aisha. In the interest of time, I'm not trying to summarize all of that, but just some key bullets that have come up in terms of recommendations, also catching and touching on what keynote speakers have said. I think clearly the impacts are clear of glacial melt. It goes beyond just one or two sectors. It is all of community impacts. It is transboundary in its nature, and the adaptation and mitigation efforts have to be systemic. So I think some of the takeaways here is integrating traditional knowledge with modern technology, enhancing regional cooperation through frameworks and innovative policies, strengthening community-based initiatives and bringing that alternate technology, thinking global but acting local, the importance of investing in climate adaptation strategies and using global partnerships and vertical financing and other opportunities available, the cross-border data sharing, the coordinated policy efforts, and the importance of sustained investments in climate change.